Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Okay, we got another lesson here for you, and what we've been talking about is the different kinds of reproduction, and you guys took a quiz on that. How you compare? There's advantages to asexual reproduction, and that's mostly faster reproduction. Populations can grow. Then there's also advantages of sexual reproduction for plants because you get diversity. So now we're going to talk about how do you get diversity? Why are parents and offspring different? And it has to do with what they call genes. And this slide here, there's a little information here on Gregory Mendel, and you can see an Austrian monk, 1822 to 1884, and he studied plants and figured out what genes were based on that work. So as we look through this, um, he, now it's part of the Czech Republic is what it says, but he studied pea plants. Okay, and they show some slides here. I'm not going to read all this, but he was trying to figure out what happened when you cross. So you see me taking almost like a paintbrush from one plant. He'd fertilize another plant, and he would do a comparison of what that you got. And so one of the things you look at is sometimes how many smooth, and this is, I think it's hard for us to see this, but smooth peas versus wrinkled. And he found out when you cross maybe a smooth plant with a wrinkled plant, what do you get? And to see how you get these different characteristics. So, I mean, he called them factors. Now we call them genes. But he kind of determined that some characteristics are dominant and others are not so, or they call recessive. So that's kind of what they kind of play on that a little bit here. And but as an example, okay, if we see and highlight this here, you take a purple, and it says purple, but to me it looks pink, so I'm gonna call it pink or purple. Who knows what I'll say? But you get this pink flower, and you cross it with a white flower. You take the pollen from the pink, cross that over to the white, and take the pollen from the white, cross it over to the pink, and what do you get? Well, this first generation they call the F1. What if you get all pink flowers? What does that mean? Well, I guess that means that the characteristic pink or purple must be a dominant characteristic. Okay, so you may wonder, well, what happened to the white? Well, if you take these and you cross them, is it possible to get a white flower so how do you get? They're showing here you get a white flower. How do you get a white flower out of all pink flowers? Well, what we know now is that a gene, a characteristic, can be hidden. It can be covered up. So it was there in these flowers. You just had to get the right combination to get this white flower. But most of the time, 3 out of 4 times, you get a pink flower. So that's genetics, and that's kind of what led to understanding of, okay, characteristics from parents can get passed on to offspring. So it brings up this idea of a gene. What is a gene? Well, it's a section of DNA, and it determines a characteristic. So the color, the height, the type of leaves, those are all possibilities from genes. Now you're thinking of blue genes probably, but here I like this diagram here. It shows that this little section is a gene. And now what is this? This is DNA, and wrapped up DNA we call a chromosome. So you kind of get the idea of what we're talking about. So this would be inside a cell. You got wrapped up DNA that makes these chromosomes, and you find those in the nucleus of cells. So a gene is one little section. So this little part here, maybe that controls the color of the flower that we looked at. Maybe another section over here controls how tall the plant is. So there would be hundreds of genes on this DNA strand. So that's actually what it is. This here kind of shows you that. If we click on what a gene is, it just tells you it's a section of the DNA molecule. They describe what the DNA is made of these bases, and it's got a backbone, kind of a sugar backbone, and DNA makes chromosomes. So hopefully that kind of helps you understand what they are. A few slides here on these base pairs and how they group together, and this is a little bit beyond what we need to know, but A combines with T and C combines with G, and it's those four bases that make up our DNA. That's all they're made of. So different combination will give you a different looking plant, and it's kind of amazing that just four different combinations, well, I guess four different bases can make up all these different combinations that make us that different. So simple in a lot of ways, but makes us much different. All right. They're showing you here that a chromosome has two variations to it, two copies, and they sometimes will be attached. So one could be what they call an allele, is one copy, one variation of a gene, and the other one could be blue, so that'd be the other variation of it. So these are called alleles, or I've also heard them called alleles. So that's what an allele is. Okay, a few more terms here. When you have a case where it's brown eyes on this allele and brown eyes on this allele, they're the same. So there's a term for that. They call it homozygous. This prefix homo actually means same, and so that stands for two alleles that are the same on a chromosome. Same allele for brown eyes. So they call homozygous brown. And if a person had that allele, those alleles, they would have brown eyes. Okay? A person that has both blue-eyed alleles would have blue eyes. So it's the gene for eye color, and there's two different alleles, or I guess more than that, since we have green eyes too. That'd be an example. So what if you had brown-eyed allele and a blue-eye allele? Person had that. What color eyes would they have? Well, we'll answer that here in a minute. You may already know, and it brings up an idea of something called dominance. Which gene is dominant? So dominant means it's more powerful, it's stronger, and it's telling you they're going to use a capital letter to represent a dominant allele. A recessive is one that gets covered up, or they're saying it gets masked by a dominant allele. And we always use a lowercase letter for recessive. So brown and blue, this combination here, what kind of eyes we're going to have? Well, it's going to be brown, because brown is dominant. And how do you know it's dominant? Well, over time you figure out what genes show up more. Once you do know it, they use the capital letter to represent that. So you can tell by the letters if that's shown. So if you were to match these up, let's just say okay, these different versions that are found on a location, well, that would be an allele. Okay, an allele is that is expressed if two versions of it are present in a cell. That means there has to be two of them. That's going to be a recessive allele. Homozygous, having two identical alleles. Okay, homozygous, same. Heterozygous, having two different alleles. And dominant would be an allele that's always expressed because it's more powerful, it's dominant. So I did a good job on that. That's what it's saying. Hey, it's saying that. So alleles would be these variation. I'll put these in the notes so you'll have that, but that's what allele is: pink and blue. And telling you dominant's always visible. We use capital letter to represent dominant. Recessive, it doesn't always show up. We use lowercase letter, and so it could be lowercase w for white. So back to this example here. How do you get when you have this purple/pink flower? We cross that, fertilize it with the white flower pollen. What happens? We can use these letters to help us understand that you could get the pink allele from this flower, and you could get the white allele from this. And so you end up with, what color would this be? This would be pink, because pink is dominant over white, and we call this heterozygous pink. You could also, if you had two white flowers, get a white from each one and end up with a white flower. This would be homozygous white. So we're starting to understand how you get these different variations. It has to do with the gene. And again, a gene is part of the DNA, and that codes for what? And we put these letters on there. We just describe it that way, but that it gets the code for white from this one, and it gets the code for white for that one. That would be ATGC, whatever combination the code is for white. That's what that would be, but we just use letters to show that. So back to this example, how could you take two pink flowers and end up with a white flower? Well, you could get both pink. That's definitely going to be pink. You could get a white from this flower and a white from this flower, and that's how you could get the white. Or you might get one of each and end up with something like this. So from two pink purple flowers, you could get any of these combinations, and that's what we call genetics. We'll talk about our next video that I'll make will be, well, what's the chances of getting a white flower? What's the chances of getting a purple flower? Or what's the chance of getting heterozygous mixed purple flower? So we use a Punnett square to show that, but I'll save that for the next video. Let me go one more thing just to tie this into meiosis. Meiosis makes reproductive cells. So a cell divides in two, okay, then they go and divide again. And so what happens, one part of that gene, the pink, goes to one cell, the white code goes to the other cell. Same thing down, same thing down here. Pink goes to one, white goes to the other. So the codes in the chromosome that's copied in half splits and goes to different cells. And not just the color, but how tall it is, and all the other genes, they get divided up. So when a flower is made in this kind of reproduction, it'll end up being unique and different from the original. And that's the main advantage of that kind of sexual reproduction for plants. All right, guys. Hopefully that makes sense. Answer a few questions about it on Edge Elastic.